and we're going to be live.
Thank you. We are here again for our second week of Race and Racism discussion series. Here, we're going to be talking about economics and race, and we have our guest, expert discussant, Dr. LaTanya Brown-Robertson, who happens to have a Ph.D. But I will introduce you to her in just a few minutes as I navigate this space. So what we'll do today is we will frame the discussion just for a few minutes. I will introduce our expert, Dr. Brown-Robertson, and then from there, we will transition to class, actually. So for those who are currently in Zoom and on YouTube, there are a few of us who will go to backstage and continue class and just continue with this fussing and discussing of this topic area. Starting with the framing of the discussion, though, I want to make sure that we start the same page, if you will. Just spend a few minutes just doing some basic house cleaning, making sure that we are all of the same understanding when we're talking about race and economy or economics in that case. So this is something very basic: income versus wealth. Income is that stream of money that comes regularly through your job, retirement, government aid, whereas wealth, however, accumulates over generations, several generations for many, actually, where those are things that make money for you when you sleep, if you will, like assets, stocks, bonds, savings, businesses, and things like farms even, our text that we're using, Racism in America or Race in America suggests. Let's dive in here. We are here and unapologetically to discuss race, racism, if you will, and economics. Median household income by race is distinguishedly higher for whites, and Blacks on this spectrum, if you will, have the lowest bar compared to other traditionally marginalized groups of people. Why? There are several reasons. We'll talk about just a few whys, if you will. There's not enough time to talk about all of the possible whys, but we'll just hone in on a couple of spaces and places. One is the segregation of the labor force. Let me slow down for a second to say, there might be considered something that's considered a white job versus a non-white job, if you will, where you have more marginalized minorities who are taking up certain types of jobs or careers, if you will, versus whites who are taking most of those particular jobs. Here, wages are lower in these majority non-white jobs comparatively to the majority white jobs, if you will. And when there starts to be a growth or influx of non-whites in the field, mysteriously, air quotes, that dynamic lowers, if you will, the wages and the status of that particular job or those jobs. Moving into the racial wealth gap. Look, whites have had a tremendous advantage from the history of America and its colonies compared to Blacks and all marginalized minorities. Blacks, no surprise, as we've been talking for the last few weeks, Blacks have the lowest generational wealth than any other race in the States. This issue, this dynamic reflects the past and the present discrimination. That disparity is so large that even the, air quotes again, well-off Blacks, they possess the same wealth as poor whites. More statistics will suggest that white families have 6 times more wealth than Blacks and Latinx families. Flipping the data on its head, not necessarily talking about wealth, but the other side of the spectrum is poverty. And while Blacks were the lowest space or bar when it came to wealth, they are the highest in poverty, and similar in reverse or converse than our previous slides, whites have the lowest bar. Whites have the lowest rate of poverty by whites alone. Now you can see some of the other bars, if you will, but these are the main issues I want to raise. You'll notice that while we won't be talking about it, there's so much more to talk about when we talk about other non-white groups. It's just not enough time right now. This is just a framing of our discussion with Dr. Brown-Robertson. There are some structural causes here. Because of the deindustrialization period, mid-level jobs have somewhat disappeared, if you will, creating an hourglass effect with the economy, right? Having significantly larger base of poor, and then larger base, if you will, of more affluent, right? 1/3 of the breadwinners in American families make less than $10 an hour. And our last statistic I want to focus on, this structural poverty issue is something that America doesn't seem to really take much attention to relative to other international counterparts, right? Smallest percentage of wealth is attributed to anti-poverty programs. We'll get into some of that actually with Dr. Brown-Robertson. This lends to a spatial mismatch in some regard. 40% of Blacks live in extremely impoverished areas, and there is a pandemic of unemployment. We've been talking about last week, at least, that there is a racial pandemic. Well, that racial pandemic is bifurcated or stratified, if you will, in several subsets. In this particular case, it's unemployment. We also have a residential segregation issue where we have issues with housing policies. And then there's the actual spatial mismatch thesis where you have your skilled workers and those who are already positioned to have money or yield money. They tend to move out where the money can be made, oftentimes in the suburb, leaving those who are not able, who don't have initially those resources, like that generational wealth, if you will, and large enough incomes for that matter, leaving the poor behind. This wealth is largely inherited, and for those who don't have the wealth, it leaves them at disadvantages. It leaves them disadvantages with what I just mentioned, the ability to be mobile enough to yield higher incomes and to start to generate more generational wealth. But it also speaks to education, the ability to send children and adults and to colleges or to trade schools or to other spaces and places where they can create and get training to sustain themselves in a way where they're not impoverished. Non-white unemployment is consistently double than of whites and over several decades. Just some quick stats, if you will. Employers are willing to hire whites 3 or 4 more times likely than equally qualified Blacks and Latinx. Applicants with white-sounding names, and Dr. Brown-Robertson and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, applicants with white-sounding names are 50% more likely to be called for an interview than those who have what might be considered Black-sounding names, if you will. And here's a data chart to sort of show what I just mentioned, if you will. The national unemployment rate shows that the African American not only is at the bottom of the employment spaces, they stay at the bottom, and whites stay at the top. And this is persistent. This data shows since 2005, but this is persistent since even before that. These dynamics yield power, privilege, and power and privilege in the workspace. And not just by race, but also by gender and race. Middle class occupants, for middle class occupants, blacks are twice as likely to be laid off than whites, and that was shown even more so during the pandemic. Whites are twice as likely to hold positions of authority over blacks and Latinxs. Women are less likely to hold positions of power, and women of color are even more so at a disadvantage. This shows, if you will, a glass ceiling effect, where there are, air quotes again, unspoken obstacles, and this homosocial reproduction, this keeps this glass ceiling in place. That homosocial reproduction piece speaks to just promoting and supporting white men. There are so many topics to cover. I promised that I would keep my section, my introduction, down to approximately 10 minutes, and I think I've done that successfully. But there are so many things that we need to cover, that we could cover, that we cover in class, and we'll have to cover in other sessions of the class and our speaker series, if you will. But look, there are things that I just want to let you know that we're not ignoring, just for the sake of time and framing our discussion. There are things that need to be talked about in further discussions around involuntary, voluntary immigrants, imported immigrants, even programs that are supposed to help people that were really initiated for whites. And then now that blacks started to take advantage of these initiatives, they became black initiatives. But we're going to focus here on an economist approach. And some of the things that Dr. Brown-Robertson has shared with me, that some of them are in the textbooks, if you will, but some of them come from practical experiences that are not easily gleaned unless you are an economist. So there's more to the story. And let me introduce to you Dr. LaTanya N. Brown-Robertson. Dr. Robertson, her professional identity is an applied urban economist and professor in economics here at BSU. She also currently serves as the PI for an NSF grant that infuses data science and analytics into the undergraduate curriculum at Bowie State University. Look, she's phenomenal. There is so much, but I'm going to skip down some. Dr. Robertson also specializes in conducting economic impact and feasibility studies for the state governments and national organizations. Woo. You don't have to follow me, but I'm going to go ahead and skip down just a little bit more because there's a lot there to focus on. She has a wealth of knowledge and experiences that she's going to share with us tonight. She's also held various positions to conduct funded research for federal and local governments. She's worked as a financial economist with the District of Columbia, Office of Research and Analysis. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree, Master of Arts degree, and Ph.D. in economics from the HU, Howard University. She is my Howard University sister. Thank you, Dr. LaTanya Brown, for joining us. And Dr. Brown, we're going to dive, Dr. Brown-Robertson, excuse me, we're going to dive right on in.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm looking forward to having this discussion. I liked how this discussion came out of a one-on-one conversation that we had,
Yes.
and how it's moved to here. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Now, Dr. Brown-Robertson, before we move forward, is there anything that you'd like to highlight about your work that I didn't capture well? I want to give this, I want to sing your praises as I sing all of our guests, but because I really do appreciate your expertise coming here. But at the same time, did I miss anything that you're working on, that you just produced, that you'd like to share? You don't have to, but this is the floor.
Okay, well, two things. I'm very, you mentioned the NSF grant and the Data Science and Analytics Initiative. That's something that I'm very passionate about.
Yes.
Not just because, really, as an economist, I'm passionate about it because I've looked at the data. I've seen where the growth is going as far as data science and analytics. So I've been really instrumental in making sure that we get a data analytics concentration, which starts in the fall of 2021,
Okay.
the College of Business. So definitely reach out to the business school on that if you're interested. But it's data analytics and data science is just becoming a norm
Yes.
on all levels, and I definitely don't want us to be behind on that as far as how we can build our wealth as a people. So definitely that's something that I want to give a great plug for. So thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Brown-Robertson. Dr. Brown-Robertson, I've learned to understand just the tip of the iceberg of your experience working on a project that we worked together. So I appreciate that opportunity. But through those discussions, right, with our other teammates and colleagues, some of the things that came out that was pretty surprising to me. So one of the things that you did was you shared with me a report that was created in 2019, really not that long ago. And I'm saying not that long ago just to talk about the recency of this dynamic. I think it was by, and this is not my field, but AEA, right? The American Economic Association, and the committee, I wrote it down, and the Committee of Equity, Diversity, and Professional Conduct. They wrote an AEA Professional Climate Survey report, right? And out of this report, one of the things that caught my eye is the percentage of Black economists in there,
Yeah.
right? And the report mentioned that there were 3% that at least responded to the survey. And of that percentage, there were 47%, there was on average 47% who indicated that there was discrimination in the field.
Yeah,
Now,
and that statistic was higher than any of the other races that indicated discrimination as well.
yeah, it's significantly higher, right? For example, Asians reported 16%, Latinx reported 4%, but the Black, and depending on the phrases that someone wants to use, Black or African American, I use them interchangeably. They reported that there was 47%. Now, we didn't conduct an ANOVA on these statistics to see if there was statistically significant, but I don't think you have to run this through SPSS to know that this is very notable, at least, right? Mm-hmm. Have you seen this? I mean, to what extent can you share this dynamic?
Yeah, I laugh because even the representative sample that they have within the study, as far as the Blacks who actually were part of the study, is similar to the number of Blacks in the profession as well. It's around 3%. It's actually significantly lower for Black females, is more so than Black males, but both of the numbers are pretty low, and there are certain initiatives around that. In my opinion, this is very much an accurate picture of what I've experienced as an economist. I like to say, okay, let's just break it down in this context. Of the only HBC, Howard University is the only HBCU that offers a PhD in economics. Okay.
Whoa. I mean, I love HU, right? And so it's just, you keep surprising me with these numbers, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, sometimes I need to repeat it, but because we're sort of in a recorded discussion, I won't have you repeat it just for the sake of impact, but wow.
Right. I mean, Jackson State offers a PhD in business administration, but it's just a concentration. So it's more of just a PhD in business administration. But as far as a clear PhD in economics where you're titled an economist, Howard University is the only HBCU that offers that. So in my experience, I feel like I've been blessed because I was in this nurturing, loving environment as I went to pursue a degree that is very much divided and is discriminatory as well. One example that I can give you from when I was in graduate school and my experiences is that we would go, maybe I shouldn't say the institution, but we would go to this prestigious white institution during the summer, and we would work on different types of research projects and everything. And the research projects had to deal with inequality and so forth. And one thing that we found was that people were so concerned about their econometric models and so forth that they never really tackled the questions that we were concerned about, that we experienced within poverty. The other piece that happened in this one meeting, and this was really my first experience dealing with the racial issues within the economics field, was that all of us was around this table. We was having a debriefing with the other economists at the other institution, and some of my fellow Howard University colleagues, we was talking about, from Howard, we're economists and, and stuff like that. And we were really proud of ourselves. And so one of the professors there said, well, you're from Howard, so that means you're last.
Whoa.
Yeah. And
that out loud, like,
yes.
In some spaces that I've only heard of, just like we can't mention certain universities, those might be fighting words.
Right. It was, because one of my professors at the time, she was actually a white lady. She got up. She was so bad. I love her. She was so bad. She got up, slammed down, she walked out the door and slammed the door, because she knew what we had to offer to those discussions, and they weren't open to hearing it. They weren't open to hearing it. They had their biases, and they played them out right in our face and everything with our discipline. So that was the beginning of that experience of how I kind of embraced, how I kind of went into economics. I was excited about, also when I was in grad school, I had the opportunity to work for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I get to work on urban issues and policy and so forth. And, we're going to solve all these issues that's impacting our community, because that's what I studied, urban economics. And so when I went into this environment, the representation was not there. It was one other Black economist there, and he ended up being my mentor. And it was great and everything that he was my mentor, but that voice and that different side of the coin of how you really need to look at different perspectives just was not there at all.
So you had non-Black, at least, and probably mostly white, if not all white, addressing urban issues who did not have a lens for urban issues.
Oh, yes, exactly. You just broke it down. You broke it down right there. And then it was just everything started turning into just these technical econometric conversations, which I can appreciate about data and modeling and everything. But then you missed a lot of the nuances and the decisions that needed to come into play that they didn't consider. One thing a lot of economists are saying right now is don't just consider just race as a whole, like Black, white, and so forth, but just it needs to be disaggregated a little, a lot more to really understand those different types of nuances and those experiences that they weren't considering at all.
No, did they assume that, and then we sort of think that we have a catchword of urban means Black, but not necessarily. There are several urban communities that are white, actually, or non-Black for that matter. So was everybody just, everybody was just lumped into a sort of a socioeconomic status?
Because they lived in an urban environment?
Yeah, or, I mean, I mean,
No,
actually, in urban environments, there are affluent people too in some urban environments. We know that in DC through gentrification. I like your book that I see behind you.
oh, thank you. Thank you. Um, so so to answer that question, no, they definitely they included race when they broke down certain variables.
Okay.
But they did not look, they looked at race, or economists always say they're looking at race as an exogenous, independent variable, instead of looking at it in the context of the fact that race, a lot of things have actually race is dependent upon a lot of other factors that kind of historically have gotten us to this point.
Yeah.
Everything. And they want to kind of, economists believe that in general, any types of imperfections within the market or whatever will eventually be cleared on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And so forth, or with little intervention. And so therefore, the whole issue of race will eventually take care of itself and really doesn't need that much attention towards it, and so forth. You kind of follow me a little bit on
No,
that, but
I do. And so, just for transparency, we had already fielded some potential questions for our discussion, right? So I don't want anybody to think that, this, like everything is only organic, although it is, but it leads to something that we were passing along in our email around the idea of whiteness and economics. And so if race wasn't necessarily considered uh, as a relevant factor, right? I wonder if that's would we attribute that to be because of whiteness or capitalism? And I say or, and I'm almost using those as synonymous terms, if you will, right? That it wasn't about race; it was only about capitalism. It's only about money. It's only about all of the underlying components of economics. It's not my issue, right? I can balance my checkbook, but that's as far as it goes, right? But
yeah.
and so would you say that this is attributed to the idea of whiteness? And yeah, I'll stop there and just to see what your thoughts are around that.
I I would say it is attributed to whiteness, but as an economist, I would, and because we're always told to shy away from the black white dynamic and focus more on people wanting to maximize their experiences, maximize their income, maximize their profit, and so forth. So it's this whole ideal of people functioning within their own self-interest. And so it really with economics, the morality and the ethical part,
Yeah.
I mean, they try to say it's there, but that really isn't the focus. We're trying to, we have this fear. This is one thing that always baffled me when I studied economics, because I believe in being resourceful and the abundance of things and everything. And I believe us as a community of Black people, we really kind of embrace that. But within economics, one of the fundamental things is to get into the whole idea of scarcity. And it's not enough. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, since it's a scarcity and it's not enough, all of us walk around trying to maximize what we want and what we want to achieve, with this whole dilemma between things being scarce. And so, like in the principles of economics class, we call that like the economizing problem, right? So
Right.
that fundamentally all of us function within this economizing problem, within our own self-interest, and so forth. And so it's all about how we can get what we want out of the situation. And it's not about race, it's about us being that individual wanting to maximize more of our utility and acquire as much as we can, based upon the whole idea that it's just not enough out there for everybody.
Okay.
Does that kind of help a little bit?
No, it helps a bunch. And so
Okay.
I want to, my thinking is not on the paper. Like we didn't go back and forth.
Oh, no, it's cool.
So I wonder, so what you're describing to me reminds me of rugged individualism. But
Mm-hmm.
rugged individualism, which is oftentimes assigned to Anglo-Saxon cultural worldviews.
Mm-hmm.
So this rugged individualism in a market where there's not enough resources for everyone. So am I hearing it right that it's ultimately, and I know I'm broad stroking it too much, but it's ultimately about what you can get as an individual before somebody else gets it.
Yeah, it's about whole fundamental idea about the economizing problem is that you have this push and pull, or this contrast between you wanting all of these things but you not having enough resources
Yeah.
to acquire them. So then you have to make a decision about how you're going to optimize what you want based
Yep.
upon the constraint of having limited resources. So within economics, and when you talk about like a market system, and within capitalism, it's all about achieving that goal of, say, like a business maximizing its profit, or individuals maximizing their income and their
Yes.
wealth and so forth. So it's about acquiring more. And so this kind of leads me into a subfield of economics, which is stratification economics,
Yes. Yes.
that Derek Hamilton, I'm gonna give him a shout out. He's
Yes. Yes.
like,
Yes.
look him up, watch some of his videos. Derek Hamilton and Bill Spriggs and Sandy Darity. They really kind of really touched on a lot of these issues with this whole concept of stratification economics.
Mhm.
And it really gets into the ideal that you have a group of people who basically are this dominant group, and it kind of gets into this whole racial construct. It looks at sociology and economics and kind of puts it all together. So what they're saying is that they want to look at the persistence of racial disparities over time, because nothing really dissipates. What they're finding out through their empirical research and so forth, when they say,
Yeah.
oh yeah, eventually the markets will clear and it won't be racial discrimination anymore because people achieve all of their self-interest and the markets would just clear. But when you talk about racial disparities, what they have found is that it is persistent over time.
That's right.
And the people who have benefited has been that dominant group. Okay. So if
Yeah.
you think about it, the dominant group, let's say, okay, it's the white group who are controlling and maintaining all of the property rights, all of the wealth, all of the income. So they have found a way to collectively work within their own self-interest to maximize what they want by affiliating themselves with that dominant group.
Yes.
So
You
yeah.
said a whole lot to me that you probably don't realize you did. Like you said so many things like, well, one, there's a focus on, there's an intersection between rugged individualism and materialism, right? So that's one thing. Every man for themselves, and white man in this particular instance for themselves, and everybody else is going to be taken care of or not, as long as I'm taken care of as a white man, right, in my family, for that matter. But it also speaks to me around how race is so important in the white society, because it is a stratification on purpose. And as long as something we talked about last week or so, and even in class, as long as you have someone at the bottom,
Mhm.
blacks, let's say, for example, but really, right, financially, as long as you have somebody at the bottom, then the poor whites are mad, but they're not so mad because they're above blacks.
Right.
But if you
Exactly.
remove race, or you remove this stratification, right, that's so persistent, and that we find in generational wealth, and we're finding in income disparities, et cetera, that I tried to present early on. You probably could have done a much better job. I should have said, hey, LaTanya, can you please present that instead of me? But those things, what you just said in 3 minutes, those things are speaking to me as far as what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, and that is so relevant when we talk about race overall. But when we focus in on economics, it's all connected,
Hmm.
right? The reason why race is here, or the use, for that matter, because it can be eradicated or could have been eradicated if they really wanted to, but it serves a purpose.
Yeah.
Right. So I went on a small rant because what you said spoke so many things to me around cultural orientation, American ways and worldview for that matter. That's a link to some European constructs as well, as well as the nature of things now. So when did the conversation start that included race? If for so long race was ignored or pushed to the side, marginalized, how and when and what happened?
Well, I think it's, when you go back and look at the literature and so forth, a lot of like, as far as like with Derek Hamilton and all of them, they have stressed, work by Becker, who was an economist who looked at racial discrimination as well. But it was the funniest thing about economists who looked at the whole ideal of racial discrimination in the past was it was just something that was just going to go away. And this was,
Yes.
okay, so they focused a lot on the labor market, like discrimination within the labor market. And one thing that Becker really believed was that that if the employer was discriminating against a Black person, the Black person will eventually leave and go work somewhere else where they weren't getting discriminated against. That's how those things were supposed to dissipate over time, right? And I'm laughing because again, that shows the cluelessness or not really understanding all of the other variables of why this Black person could not leave this this racist environment.
Right.
And then on the other side, it was, some other research basically saying statistically, and I hear some of this now, they talk about, well, it just aren't enough Black people in the pipeline and stuff like that for different jobs and different careers and so forth. So basically what they're saying is based upon the statistics and what's out there, they're going to go ahead and hire within this race because it's not enough Black people out there to fulfill those types of fields and so forth. So those have been some of the norms within economics as far as the theories and so forth when it comes to like racial discrimination and so forth. But it's been a major gap. I mean, my area, like I said, I'm in urban economics, I'm in housing economics. So one thing that really baffles me is just where Bowie State is located in Prince George's County. We have homes that are basically the same amenities as a home in Montgomery County. Same crime rate, same neighborhood things and everything. You put this in a hedonic, what we call a hedonic housing price model, you would think that the housing values would be the same. But the only difference is Black people live over here and white people live over here. But economists don't really want to address those issues head on and so forth. There's some research out there now where they're trying to have discussions with appraisers and why this happens and so forth. But if you really kind of look at it with the whole idea of stratification economics, which really kind of became big around the turn of the century and so forth. So with stratification economics, if you add that component to it, then that helps to really kind of analyze that gap that we know we see, we know we feel, but it isn't being explained within the research and the theories and so forth. So I'm really happy that they're really holding the mantle on this. But I honestly, mainstream economics and economists within the AER and the American Economic Association, they're not embracing. Well, they're trying to embrace it through the study that you referenced and so forth. But it's a lot in order to really, in my opinion, in order to really embrace racial discrimination within economics, you have to look at it from a historical lens. you have to, because a lot of things that may have been designed, um, over 100 something years ago have been so institutionalized that it now creates this self-fulfilling prophecy when you don't even want it to be that way within certain communities, as far as Black community psychological thinking about what they can do and how they can do it and how they can grow and so forth economically. So,
and that trend, that histogram, a line graph that I showed that the white generational wealth was increasing, and while Black and Latinx, still stayed quite low and flat. Whites were still growing. And so that speaks to, I think, what some of the stuff you're saying.
yeah, and then also, I mean, for years, and you kind of touched on this too. It's a lot of that wealth of Black labor and so forth has contributed to the white wealth. So the land, the tilling of the land, the labor that even went into building up these white organizations and institutions and so forth are sorry, my dean was calling me.
No, it's okay.
But all of those things really build up into the creation of wealth of the white dominant group and takes away from the wealth and the investment within their own Black community.
So I didn't hit home like you just did on that. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a piece that if I did cover it, I glazed over it and didn't do it so well. But thank you for really honing on that. That's an important piece. I mean, some of the things that you mentioned was we're reading the epistemologies of ignorance as well, race and the epistemologies of ignorance. And one of the things that you mentioned, that you alluded to, was positionality, if you will. Like white folks thinking that Black people can just quit or be fired and just simply move on to another job is not many of Black folks' reality, right? But that's a reality through their lens, thinking that it's just going to be okay.
Right. Or that they can just easily go ahead and migrate to different areas and afford to live where they want to live, or if they do move further away, they can still access their job because they have access to the transportation and the resources that they have access to. But not if that group is really controlling all of the resources. And in particular, one thing I want to say in particular in economics is so important is the property rights. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you get into the concept of property rights, you're really getting into the concept of policy. You get into the concept of the legal ramifications and who owns what. And we've seen a lot of that, as far as the land that's been taken away from the Black community and so forth. I mean, all of those things really play into not accumulating that wealth within the Black community, because it's always been some type of provision through zoning or rules or regulations and so forth to kind of reappropriate certain level of property rights to other groups. And then if you also think about it, as far as the labor and the skill set, one thing that I didn't know, but historically with the New Deal, a lot of the benefits that was given to lower skilled workers and so forth, the Black employees still did not receive those benefits. Those things benefited the white community, and we're seeing that even today with the pandemic. With the retail sector and how that's being impacted and so forth, they have no type of, a lot of them can't collect unemployment insurance benefits.
That's right.
So that causes more disparity and more inequality.
You cheated and you snuck a peek on my cheat sheet.
Oh, right? I did.
Definitely the next place, and I appreciate that. And that's what are some of the barriers, and that's really important. The ability to own property and leverage property, is one of the things I think you're mentioning. And then some of the programs that have been developed, I alluded to this on the slide deck, didn't think we could, I'm so happy that you touched on it, because I mean, it really opens up an entire can of worms around, some other issues with regard to economics and racism. But you're saying, you've said one, the property value. I'm going to repeat that again so I can catch my train of thought. And and two, you are, and I just lost it, Dr. Brown-Robertson. Just lost
Well,
it.
yeah, I mean, definitely, the barriers for the Black community definitely deals with the reallocation of, if we did have property rights on certain things, that's been taken away. And also, the fact that we, just, it's a lot of barriers to entry, even within new fields. You
Yes.
know what I'm saying? And so, and my belief is that some of this is just by design. I mean, one thing that I always think about with barriers to entry for small minority owned businesses, they may have these 8A set asides where you can go ahead and qualify to be a part of the small minority owned business and get your 8A certification. But anybody who has tried to go through, who has gone through that application process, that's a barrier to entry within itself.
Right. Right.
And so, while they say, yes, we have these policies and these set asides and so forth within communities to rectify these issues, it's a lot of different hoops that you will have to go through to even be a part of it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saving me just now. And so one of the things that that I was thinking is that there have been a lot of programs that really have been developed for white Americans, but Black Americans and other marginalized groups have been excluded from those. Right? You mentioned the New Deal, but the GI Bill, even welfare initially, and now that Blacks and other marginalized groups have started to take advantage of it, the same accommodations given to whites, they are not looked at. They are either still excluded, they have to jump huge hurdles like getting the A1 certification, or they're looked at as in a pejorative way, right, as negative. And so therefore they're loafers, or they're lazy, or they won't get a job, or how long are they going to stay on here? Forever? And those kind of things.
Yeah, economics. One thing that I want to say is that with economics, when you look at Blacks, if they make less than whites, the way economists would just describe that as well, they have their skill set isn't as strong.
Yeah.
But like you said in your talk, the data doesn't quite show that. Another thing is, like, when someone is unemployed in economics, is three main categories of being unemployed: frictionally unemployed, when you're in between jobs;
Yes.
typically unemployed, when you're laid off because of the decline in the economy; and structural unemployment is that your skills do not meet the demand in that market. But structural unemployment really needs to dig deeper, because how do you sit up there and say that the unemployment rate is so much higher and has been higher for the Black community? How do you describe that outside of race for that unemployment rate? And they just, it's just more of, okay, well, it has to do with them making poor decisions, or with them not having the right skill set. So it just kind of perpetuates these negative myths about Black people and everything, to make it seem like it's something on us more so than it's something on how we are viewed within society.
That's right. And I lean on an older saying, blaming the victim mentality, if you will, right? And I actually see that as an intersection where economics intersects other institutions with education. If the education institution is not effectively developing and teaching our children in an equitable way, then that puts yet even more so of a challenge for African Americans as they're trying to become consumers and really impact the economy, or the workforce for that matter, on top of employers being less likely to hire them in the first place.
Right. And then when you think about it, where does most of the funding come for public education? It
Right.
comes from local property taxes. And if
Yes.
you're not appraising these houses that are comparable to the white neighborhoods like they are with the Black neighborhoods, then you're not going to get the revenue from the property taxes to finance it. And then you're not paying these Black folks enough money in the first place for the same job that they're doing. So they can't even afford the property taxes. And so what eventually happens, they may go through foreclosure and so forth, which therefore causes this overall multiplier effect in the decrease of housing values.
Wow.
Which impacts the allocation of resources for the school systems.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely, it's directly tied, not just closely tied. Thank you. Dr. Brown-Robertson, I have one more question for you, and I'm not sure if it's answerable, but I want to hear your thoughts. And then if it's okay with you, either you can continue to, focus on anything you want to talk about on this issue, and maybe open it up for Q&A.
Okay.
But what's next? Do you see any solutions to the financial gaps that are based on race?
Yeah, so the people that I cited before, Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity on stratification economics, they've actually came up with some pretty interesting solutions that I really support, and I think a lot of us would support. And it really they offer how reparations could actually happen.
Yes.
Okay, so there's that difference in the Black and white wealth gap.
Yes.
Could be taken care of with reparations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then another piece that they focus on are baby bonds. So children within certain types of lower income economic groups can receive a bond when they're born, and then they acquire the money when they're 18.
Yes.
So it is generated that wealth. But all of those are federal government programs that they're proposing. For me, I really believe that it's a lot that could be done as far as the relationship between unemployment benefit insurance and expanding that, like I was saying before, to workers who may not have been, whose employer was not paying into this unemployment insurance benefit and so forth because of their job title or what they were actually doing, say within the restaurant service industry and so forth. So really restructuring those different types of programs, equitable, one thing that can really throw a person from middle income to lower income is healthcare. If you have any type of health situation, you're going to lose your job. You may lose your job.
Yes.
And you have all of these bills to pay and so forth. So definitely offering more, really looking, I think it's great what the Affordable Health Care Act did initially, but definitely building upon that and not just throwing it to the side. Also on the local government and the state government, a lot of times federal policies, they kind of move it down to the state and local government level. And so that's where you're seeing a lot of disparities within those policies that kind of build up and aggregate up into a whole disparity and racial mismatches within all of society.
Yeah.
So really kind of digging deep into some of those local government policies and addressing those types of disparities and how they have created certain types of disadvantages between groups. It definitely needs to be overall. The solution, in my opinion, needs to be a reallocation of resources between the dominant group to the other groups. And the reason why, and only people who could do that is the government. People don't want to do that on their own.
Now, wait a second, the government, but so the government is largely run by white men.
Right, exactly. So that's what happened. So we got to vote, right? We got to vote.
Right. Right. And we got to keep fighting, not just vote, but we got to keep fighting reconstitution of voting laws like they've done in Georgia.
Exactly. And being a part of that policy, speaking up for the policy and so forth, and following what the economic impacts are of those policies on race and stuff. That's why I think was so great, the projects that we was working on racial justice, because we were given the opportunity to have a say on how it impacted race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a quick shameless plug. I shared with my children that when the police reform bill came through, I was like, yeah, I did that. Me and my cohort of 5 superheroes did that.
That was such a wonderful, it was like we had a part in making the world, we had a small part in making the world a little bit more fair. And so hopefully we'll get more opportunities like that to not just study crime bills, but study racial inequities within education, racial inequities within healthcare, right? Other racial inequities that exist in all areas. So hopefully this will give us an opportunity, not just for us, but for other HBCUs and other professors at other HBCUs to really work with their local governments and their state governments in doing these types of racial disparities.
Dr. Brown-Robertson, I'm taking notes. I can't thank you enough. I don't have much money. I work on a professor salary. So,
I can relate.
I give you, a pound of thank yous, a million pounds of thank yous. So thank you so very much. I had another question, but I'll save it. Is it okay unless there's something you want to add, is it okay that I ask a couple questions that are coming from the guests and the participants that are watching?
Sure.
Okay, and let's see. The first one that came through from YouTube. Can you speak about the impact of affirmative fair housing in this context? The context that you were talking about as far as housing, I believe. This initiative was immediately squashed as a priority under the previous administration.
Okay, affirmative fair housing. Okay, so I'm not that familiar off the top of my head with that particular policy, but in general, with the fair housing, I believe, I'm not too sure on that policy, so I can't really speak to it in detail, but with the whole idea of housing opportunities and so forth, that is something that definitely needs to kind of move through within, as far as a policy, because there are inequities, not just as far as home ownership rates, because African Americans have really low home ownership rates compared to whites, but also the whole idea of their value of the housing that is being out there and so forth, and making sure that it's comparable. So yeah, I'm gonna do a little bit more digging into that one. But
no, I appreciate your response though. And let me give a plug to anyone who's either on YouTube or the class who's in Zoom. Please, if you haven't already and you have some questions, please put them in the chat in both YouTube, depending on your platform, or here in the Zoom. And to the best of my abilities, as long as Dr. Brown-Robertson doesn't jump off, and before 6:30, I will pose questions. So we have a question from YouTube from Dr. Akita Pearson, who is our colleague in TLPD. What about reparations and using reparations to build wealth and fully funding Black farmers and addressing the past of taking land and livestock?
Wow. I mean, like I said, I think that as far as what Dr. Darity and Dr. Hamilton are proposing about using the reparations for the using that percentage of what that black and white wealth gap is, because right now it's what, like 10-1 between blacks and just whites.
Yeah.
And so using that to fulfill that gap, and then allocating it to descendants of slaves, and to individuals who within the Black community and everything that have been impacted by a lot of these reallocation of property rights and so forth with land and so forth is definitely something that should be looked at. And like I said before, it's not something that, in my opinion, as an economist, it's not something that we're going to do on our own. It's not like people are going to say, you know what, go ahead and here, you know, a white person going to come up to you and say, here, take this percentage so we can be fair. It's definitely going to involve a government intervention on the federal level for that to happen. But it's possible, and it's been done with other races. And the question really is, when that's done, I think it also needs to couple with showing why we're doing this, explaining why we're doing it. I mean, your areas within education, putting it within the curriculum everywhere of why this is being done and everything. So it's not something that's something that will be here one time and then may go away, like affirmative action and how it can be shot down on different state levels and so forth. But really kind of if people understood the historical context of how we've gotten to this point economically, as well as the empirical context. Because another thing I want to say, and this is why I'm such a big person on data science and analytics as well, data is vast. Data is out there. Big data is everywhere. A lot of the questions and the theories that economists have came up with now can be revisited based upon the vast amount of data that's already available to really maybe debunk some of the things that they might have came before as far as different principles within economics.
Wow, thank you for that very comprehensive response. You know, I listened to Dr. Wilmer Leon. He was actually a guest on our speaker series from last semester, and he's the radio host, Sirius XM host of Urban Issues. But he mentioned, or he had mentioned and facilitated a conversation around reparations being a worldwide focus, not just in the States, because those who were descendants of slaves from all over the world in different ways and spaces and different I'll just leave it at different ways, could use reparations. And that could come from the UN and not just America.
Right. And then also, when you put it in that context, it's not just people within the diaspora, it's also, colonialism.
Right.
And we talk about countries within Africa and how the reappropriation and the taking of their resources and so forth. And then them having to, basically go into debt with organizations such as the World Bank.
Yes.
And all of those pieces, those things need to be addressed as well. My husband has this shirt. I love this shirt. He says, "Why is it that darker skinned people are hated the most around the world?" And it just, and so that's where it really kind of gets into that piece.
Yeah, I have another question or two. So from Richard Knight, it says, we need Black economists to redefine issues impacting African Americans through their more objective lens. How does racism impact healthcare, and what is the role of HBCUs in this particular case?
Wow. Okay. And thank you, Richard Knight. I know who Richard Knight is. Thank you for watching. So how does racism impact healthcare? You're right. Economists, the pull of economics has always been to try to look at things in an objective lens and an objective viewpoint, but we missed the mark, because we shouldn't be accused of not being objective if we're pulling in the idea of race and so forth. So on the healthcare perspective, Richard Knight, he's done a lot of research on with the American Kidney Association.
Yes.
Okay, and so you and I was, it's funny, we was talking about this, right?
Absolutely, we were just talking about that, and we
Right.
we promised to keep the conversation on economics, but wherever you take it, Dr. Brown-Robertson, that's where we'll go.
So health equity also deals with in economics, really deals with how we aren't getting the same amount of resources and knowledge that is needed to make educated decisions and so forth. And it comes from a lot of apprehensions and fears that we've had in the past, like with the Tuskegee experiment and so forth. But I feel like we are evolving within that piece. And so on the kidney side, with kidneys, African Americans have the highest rate of kidney failure. Okay, so they have this high rate of kidney failure. But what they're finding out with the research is that it's a gene. It's called the APOL1 gene. So if they have this gene, then they're more likely to have kidney failure. And so that means that they could salvage all of the other African American kidneys. So within the data for a long time, they have looked at African American kidney and says, okay, this has a high failure rate. But when you dig deep and you disaggregate that data and so forth, which is so important within the Black community and so forth, you're seeing that no, a lot of these African American kidneys are salvageable, but yet the ones, we just need to find out whether or not this person has the APOL1 gene. So if you have that gene, then that's when it's no longer salvageable. And so the research needs to be put into place for those studies to be done, and that awareness and the lack of fear within some of the things that that have encountered with us within healthcare, we need to embrace it a little bit more to be a part of the research when it's open.
Wow, thank you. And thank you for Richard Knight for being that Confederate in there to give you a good question. I have a question. We have just a few more minutes, if it's okay with you, Dr. Brown-Robertson. I have a question from our one of our doctoral students, who's soon to be Dr. Brown himself, Linville Brown. Is there a relationship between scarcity and COVID-19?
Let me think about that. So scarcity in this, COVID-19 in the sense of the Black community, or just in general? I guess I need to understand a little bit more the context of COVID-19. Like,
well, yeah, let's say in the Black community. Let me he can't follow up himself, but let's say Black community, we're talking about racism, so let's start with Black folks.
Okay, so I don't think there's scarcity of COVID-19 in the Black community, because we're the ones that have been disproportionately impacted with the disease. And it's due to a lot of underlying health conditions. And it is interesting because some of my fellow economists and researchers, they're doing this study now, which I think this is exciting. And I wish I had the link so people could sign up. But they're trying to do this focus group study on how racism impacts your health. So racism within the job market and so forth impacts your health. And so when you look at those correlations between stress and working and dealing with racism on so many levels, just from just the sheer fact of watching another Black man, get killed by police again, you know what I'm saying? And then the George Floyd and so forth. All of this is impacting our health, causing a lot of underlying health conditions. And then with COVID-19 coming into play, it definitely exacerbates the issue. One thing that I believe in general with COVID-19 is that it has the disparities that existed, it has exacerbated them. It has shed a light where people can't turn a blind eye. And so that's why it's so wonderful that you're having this conversation about racism and keeping that conversation going. Because once COVID-19 goes and everything and so forth, and we kind of go back to our normal lives, I'm
Yeah.
wondering whether or not these conversations are gonna be as important. You
And
know?
that's important for people who are non-Black, for that matter, because
Right.
they become mighty important for us, and they've always been important to us. But what about others who we need in some regard to continue to push them, the activism in our civil rights? I have a question or statement, and I'll read this and then go to a quick question because we're running out of time. From soon-to-be Dr. Clyde Dougherty, who, as you know, is VP of athletics at Bowie State University. In 1865, there was a proposal to give each enslaved member 40 acres and a mule when slavery ended, which was never issued, or not issued for very long. I mean, I'm improvising. Whatever 40 acres and a mule cost at the time, price it by our today's standards and provide those funds to every Black person. It may be oversimplified, but it is a historical perspective.
Yeah, when you think about it, that's true. That's definitely true. You could think about the value of what those acres would be in today's society, which would the value would change based upon where people live geographically. And it probably would be more than what that black white gap is, wealth gap.
Absolutely.
So one other thing is that I wanted to mention was that the McKinsey and Company, they came out with this study in 2019 where it was looking at the economic impact of disparities within the Black community. And what they said that if America keeps on treating Black folks the way, I'm just gonna break it down in my life. If America keeps on treating Black folks the way that they are in 10 years, overall, the American society would have lost $1.5 trillion.
Woo-wee.
Yes. And so things need to change because it's people need to understand that while they're doing that short run, immediate maximization of their utility and their income by being within that dominant collective group, overall, down the line, and in the long run, it's impacting us collectively within a society where our GDP, our gross domestic product, is not growing to the level that it should. So therefore, collectively, we need to get out of groups and who we are to start investing in the whole collective to build up our overall economy.
So did I hear, and correct me because you're the expert, right? Did I hear that while racism, a social construct, was sort of put in place because of capitalism, right? And to build capitalism, right? And since before slavery, it is actually by now what is hurting our economy.
Yep. And you can look it up. It's the McKinsey report, and they're predicting after different types of model simulations by constantly contributing to this wealth gap and having a lack of savings as well as community engagement and so forth, and not investing in this Black community the way you need to, it's going to hurt us all.
Wow.
$1.5 trillion.
Dr. Brown-Robertson, I have one more question. This is going to be a rapid fire, right? From Charlene Allen. She's posted it some time ago, so I want to just acknowledge her. She's soon to be Dr. Allen also. Much of what we have seen historically is that when the health gap or other disparities affiliated with race are raised in public discourse, the conversation turns to social factors or programs as solutions. Do you think the government or society is ready to publicly address systemic racism as a real issue behind economic disparities?
No, I hate to say that, and I don't want to sound negative and so forth, but I believe now it's more of a heightened awareness. So we need to, whenever I talk to people who are really within these realms and so forth, we're like, oh, we got to get this while the iron is hot, because just like with the policies that really help to kind of move us forward after the civil rights and the civil rights policies and so forth, those things kind of were lost in the 1980s when you saw a change in a lot of these policies as well.
Yes.
So during this moment, I think we need to seize the moment, and we need to do whatever we can within our own context of what tools we can bring to make people aware, to try our best to change policy while people are listening, because the people's attention spans are very short, and they'll move on to something else, and they will not understand that, hey, look, this is impacting us all. So I think really kind of having, as an economist, the way I would sell it to my white brothers and sisters is, you're hurting yourself at this point as well by not being collective and inclusive.
That's a conversation that I think I'm gonna hold on, put in my front and back pocket, and look at it some more, because to be honest with you, I haven't heard it in that way before. So thank you for offering that. Dr. Brown-Robertson, again, I can't thank you enough. You've been phenomenal by showing up and really providing your expertise in really a short period of time. We can have an entire semester just talking about economics and race and racism. And I appreciate you coming and providing expertise for us to dig a little deeper. It's well beyond my expertise. There's no way I could have done this by myself, and really talk about the issues that you brought to the table today. So thank you, my good colleague.
Thank you. Anytime. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. So with that being said, I'm going to close up shop. The students in the race and racism, the seminar on race and racism course, please jump on this other Zoom link at 7:30. Give us a chance to transition, give us a chance to, get a bite, give me a chance to jump off and then jump on. And I'll see you at 7 o'clock with or through our other Zoom link. Dr. Brown-Robertson, thank you again. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your class. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Now, before I release everyone, or before I go, let me give a quick thank you that I almost